Hello, and welcome to Roll for Topic, a roundtable discussion about topics related to running role playing games. I'm Chris Salzman.
And I'm Andy Rao.
Andy, we're a few weeks out from Roll for Topic Con 2024, and I'm just wondering, do you feel like you are recovered from the con, or are you still sort of riding that high?
I think I've recovered from the con. For about
Hmm.
a week or so afterwards, I was a little bit wiped, but
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. I think time has gone by. It feels I was surprised actually that it was only just about 2 weeks ago because
Hmm.
it I can't decide if it feels like it was just yesterday or if it was like feels like it was a couple months ago. But I don't know.
Yes.
So I'm bad at time though. So
Yeah. It's interesting because I mean we both organized the con and then we ran games at the con too, which I think this might be the last year that I can that I can do this. Yeah, it
yeah,
was a very exhausting day, and then on top of that, we just had we recorded a podcast during it. There was like a handful of other things. My experience of it was amazing. Like it was a really good day, and I kind of collapsed afterwards. Like the the day after was pretty hard, so I
yeah.
can't imagine doing it again. So like shout out to all the people that run conventions, that run events. Yeah, my hat is off to you.
Not running a game at this again. It's too much. I registered my game late. I hadn't been
Hmm.
planning on it.
Yeah.
I kind of talked myself into it, and then nope, not so. Stop me next year if you see me registering a game. Remind me that I said not going to do it. It's too
Yeah.
much.
We'll have to set a reminder for ourselves for the next one that comes around. Like, remember, you were exhausted at the
Yeah,
end of it. A good exhaustion. I think like we're not going to do like a deep dive into exactly what the con was and all that, but just suffice to say, it was super enjoyable. It was super great. It's really fun to see kind of seeing it grow from year to year. And yeah, I'm excited to see what we end up doing next year with it too.
yeah, that sounds awesome. So
Yeah.
why don't we why don't we each ran a game at the con?
Hmm.
And I know I have some questions. I did not play in yours. You played in mine. I think
Yes,
it
I
was kind
did.
of a last minute thing, right? That
Hmm.
you saw an open seat and you sat down.
Yeah.
So I have some questions about yours because it looked pretty intriguing.
Yeah.
But before we get to the con, can we do a flashback to like 6 months ago? I have a follow up question to something,
Oh,
and
really? Okay.
yeah, I wanted to ask you how the Silmarillion went for you this year, and did
Oh, wow.
you did you eject from the Silmarillion at a certain point? Did you
Mhm.
stick with it and enjoy it? Like, I was just curious.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I did eject from the Silmarillion. I was listening to an audiobook version of it, and it was one that was done, I don't know, maybe in the 70s or 80s or so. It was not great. So it was not great, and the reader was doing as good of a job as they could, but you could tell they were sort of like stumbling over maybe some of the Elvish F names. They're like,
Yeah,
well, I
for
guess
sure.
this is how I'm going to pronounce this one. Yeah, so I kind of ended up putting it down just because it was not really engaging me. Although I've heard that Andy Serkis did some audiobooks of I think The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, and Silmarillion. So I want to pick those up if I'm ever going to do it again to try it. But I will say that so I probably listened to I don't know maybe the first third of the book or so. It was incredibly good, and I find myself thinking about like little details from it quite a bit. Like, and it's very interesting, especially in terms of like when people will mention stuff in Lord of the Rings or thinking about the Lord of the Rings, and then it'll like remind me of stuff in the Silmarillion and be like, oh my goodness, like that is like there's so much more depth there, and it's just kind of this throwaway line. I did also find that it sort of made my interest in the Rings of Power sort of go way down. I think like just
Interesting. Yeah.
yeah, because like Rings of Power, like I mean, I didn't mind the first season, but I think like there's nothing about the second season that really interests me.
Yeah.
Yeah, just sort of like I don't know, like the lore in some ways doesn't go deep enough. I think in that movie, or sorry, in the movie, in the show, in the show for me to really like get super involved in it. When like if I'm thinking about like well if I'm going to put any time into like Lord of the Rings media, it's going to be going back to read one of the
Yeah.
books at this point. Yeah, getting a little bit into it. Like I mean, I probably thought about Ungoliant like every day since since like reading that story, right? It's just like I mean, like what a strong and like terrifying image of like evil and darkness or whatever, right? Like so having some of those that's really good. I also just like in general, like I'm not very trivia oriented when it comes down to it. So stuff like long lists of names like are hard for me. Just like my brain just kind of slides off of them too. And even getting down to like the like some of the cosmology stuff too for like the very first chapters in the Silmarillion, like I can't quite remember like who Manwë is, and like like the bar, like it's like this. Like, I understand that it'd be really cool, but like I need to make flashcards, right? Is what it comes down to. And then if I'm getting to the point where I'm making flashcards for a book that I'm reading for fun, I'm like, I don't, I don't know if I'm approaching this in quite the
Yeah.
correct way. So
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Do you
yeah,
have a favorite scene from the bits of Silmarillion that you did make it through? Does anything spring to mind?
yeah. I think like yeah, Ungoliant's like whole thing is pretty great, but I think like for me the thing that sticks out, and we might have even talked about it like when I was talked about it on the podcast when I was reading it, is just like the emphasis on music, especially in the beginning, and like
Yes, that
yes, like
opening is amazing.
it's so good. I mean, and like just like what a way to think about kind of like a myth and a creation story too, about like this like song that's being sung, you know, and you have yeah, you have like this discordant melody kind of like coming into it too, and like I don't know, and I think there's like this also this understanding that even with those different melodies and stuff, it's like it's pulling the song in different directions and making it more rich and interesting. Yeah, so it's in some ways it's a very like black and white like creation myth, but in other ways it's like this very shades of gray, creation
Yes.
myth too.
One
Yeah.
of the weakest critiques of like the Lord of the Rings is that it's this sort of black. I think that it's this like really simplistic morality fable. But
Yeah.
man, read that creation story with the music in the Silmarillion, and tell me that isn't a complex, fascinating
Hmm.
way to understand like good and evil and ambition and order and
Hmm.
chaos. I mean, it's fascinating. It's an amazing sequence. And like it's yeah, I don't know, it's 20 pages and it gives you like it's 20 pages and it presents you with this whole new idea of how things ought to be and how things can go wrong. Like it's just fascinating.
Yes. Yeah. 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 That like the simplicity argument, I think, also bothers me because like in some ways Lord of the Rings is just a tale of lots of people finally making the right decisions, right? Like when they haven't been for so long. Like, and there's like nothing in there is a foregone conclusion, right? Like it's it's just this amazing tale of like that essentially comes down to Samwise, right? Like Samwise doing the right thing,
Yeah.
repeatedly throughout. And it's
The
just like,
hero of the story does not do the right thing in the end. Like what?
yes, yeah.
That's amazing. That's remarkable.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay. This is not the Lord of the Rings, how great the Lord of the Rings is
Yeah.
podcast. But yeah, yeah, thanks for checking in. I mean, I think that is something I'm going to pick back up, and I'll probably try the Andy Circus version this next
Yeah.
time. I have proven to myself that I'm unlikely to just read the Silmarillion for the first time, like straight through. Like I think I need someone to read it to me like a bedtime story. That's what it comes
Yeah,
down
and
to.
I think
Yeah.
that that's a pretty that feels like a pretty natural
Hmm.
way for medium for it to be conveyed honestly
Yeah.
as a story. So
Yeah.
well, yeah, I partly bring it up cuz I am starting on my own kind of literary like white whale and
Mm.
that's an appropriate metaphor or cliche or whatever because I'm
Is
going
it
to try to
Moby
read
Dick?
yeah, I'm going to try to read Moby
Oh,
Dick.
nice. That's great. Yeah.
The reputation of Moby Dick that I have internalized is that it's impenetrable details about whales. But over the last like 5 years, I probably know four completely different people whose opinions I respect who have come to me and said, I just read Moby Dick and it was incredible. Like, and
Hmm.
so I
Okay.
don't know, maybe my expectations are too high, but like I gotta like that's too many people for this to be written off as like a quirk of like that one weirdo who likes books about whale hunting, right? So anyway, I'm
Yeah.
gonna give it a crack and maybe I'll check in a I'm gonna take it slow. Maybe I'll check in a month or two about how my progress is going through that.
Oh,
But
that's really great. Yeah, that book is also on my list of white whales. I think it's like that and Ulysses are two books where I'm like, I really should read those
yeah,
at some point, but I don't know if I'm ever going to. It's interesting. Every time I've read like made an honest try to read like one of those, I don't know, like difficult books, right? Like I think it's always a surprise when it's enjoyable. And I think this is in some
yes,
ways maybe the entire experiment of teaching like English literature classes in high school is that you're sort of hoping that at the end of it a certain number of kids will sort of realize like, oh, we're reading The Great Gatsby because it's a really fun book to read, not like because it's a book
yes.
that's being assigned to me or whatever. Like, you know, you think about like Pride and Prejudice, or like, you know, anything by like, you know, by like Jane Austen often gets sort of derided as like this very like stuffy and old and whatever stories, or like they're just romance stories or whatever. Like they're so funny and they're so rich and they're so interesting and things like that. And I think that's probably what you're gonna find with Moby Dick as you get into it. It's like, oh, actually this is a really good action book.
Isn't that an amazing experience? The experience, I absolutely had this, and my mind went immediately to Jane Austen. The experience of, like, these books, they're considered great works of literature, but we
Hmm.
all kind of know they're boring and stuffy and dull.
Yeah.
And then when you actually read it, because your high school literature class made you read it, sometimes you realize, oh my gosh, this is really good. Like, I had
Yeah.
that experience with Pride and Prejudice,
Hmm.
Jane Austen, right? Nobody else in my class liked it. We were all basically primed to find it stuffy and dull. But when you actually read it, if you're really reading it in earnest, this is this is a great book. And
Yeah.
it makes you want to be an evangelist for it, you know? Like,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
in high school, going around like, no, I know the teacher assigned this and it's really dull, but like, you should just like read it and try to
Hmm.
enjoy it because it's actually pretty good.
Yeah, it's I don't know. There's something about that. Like, so I read Cloud Atlas recently. Like, and I think we talked about it on the
Yes.
podcast, I
Yes,
think,
yes,
a little
yes.
bit.
And that
But
reminds me, I have wanted to ask you about this on the podcast, but
okay.
so maybe we don't need to go into super depth, but
Yeah.
tell me a little bit.
Yeah, so I enjoyed it thoroughly. Like, and it is a book that I think is considered very dense and very like complicated and sort of hard to get your mind around. And it absolutely was all those things, but it's also a book where if you just sort of read it, like it's I don't know, like the mysteries sort of reveal themselves to you throughout it, but it's just a set of very very fun sort of short stories put together. Yeah, put together with
Yeah.
like, you know, some threads sort of bringing them all together. But like, yeah, I mean, it's just like it's very interesting how it got this reputation as a difficult book to read when I found it to be almost breezy to read, like, and
Yeah.
a book that I was looking forward to getting time to sit down to read every time I had a chance to read it, because it's, yeah, like without like giving too much away, right? It's like the stories in it are loosely interlocking. Like they do sort of reference each other throughout, and like that's a big part of the joy of it, is like the recognition of like, oh, this is how this connects to this, you know, like all these things kind of connect together. But even if you never picked up on any of that, it's still 5 to 6 really good stories right, put
Yes.
into a book. And like, I think if you reduce it down to this complex puzzle, like you miss out on the fact that it is also just, yeah, these like excellent characters going through these, you know, emotional and really like action packed and like, I don't know, transformative experiences too, at the same
Yeah. I
time.
had
So like, yeah, go on.
When you were reading it, you would post occasional updates like in the Discord chat, and I remember thinking, I hope Chris just reads it and doesn't worry too much about how is this all going to connect? What does
Hmm.
this mean? Am I missing some part of some clues or some part of the puzzle? It's
Yeah.
like, a good book like this has everything you need in it to enjoy it fully, right?
Hmm.
You don't need to think outside of the book. You can just read the book the way it's presented, and that's all you need to like appreciate what it's trying to do, I think. So
Yeah.
I hope
Yeah.
that you had that experience.
Yeah, no, and I did, and yeah, thank you, yeah, to you. And I think Joel, one of our friends, too, was like, yeah, kind of watching that thread too, and you know, guiding it a little bit. It's, yeah, so like, I mean, I loved reading it, right? Like when it comes down to it, it's like I loved reading it, and like I'd recommend it to anyone, just as like a, this is a good book to read. Like, it's not a like, oh, I got to eat my vegetables and read this difficult book that I'm not going to
Yeah.
enjoy so I can understand something else about culture or whatever. It's like, no, like it's actually just really good. Like like there's reasons for it. Yeah,
Yeah.
like, not to say that it's, you know, it's not like a Tom Clancy thriller, right? Like designed to have, you know, 2 sentence long paragraphs, you know, like 200 pages or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Like, and there's nothing wrong with those sorts of books either, but like it does challenge you a little bit. But I think you come away with like probably a deeper understanding about like humanity too. Yeah, which like, humanity, like, which that's great, but also it's really fun. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, and I think like so much good literature is like that, where it's like it's actually okay. Like, yes, it's going to feel a little bit like you're crossing over to this like literary world or whatever, like, but trust me, it's actually like a fun read, and it's going to make you like think about think about stuff and think about your own life in a different way too. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, hey, although I did learn a lot less about how nuclear submarines work from Cloud Atlas than I did from all the Tom Clancy I read in high school. So I don't know. I would
Yeah.
say it's a wash as far as
Yeah, a little bit of a
literary value
wash.
goes.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so hey,
Yeah.
thank you for indulging my
Oh yeah.
the book report section of this
Yes.
podcast, and let's talk about our experiences running role playing games at RFDCon because we each
Hmm.
ran a game,
Yeah.
and these were one shot games in a 3 hour time period.
Yes.
So I think your game was, has we have there's more to talk about in your game, I think. So let me just say, as someone who didn't play in your game, I looked over at the corner of the room where you were running your game.
Hmm.
There was always laughter and shouting coming from that corner. So your players are having a great time. And on this podcast, we have discussed that you are planning this game to include a number of, like, I guess if this were a video game, you would call it like a mini game, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
So like just you pause the normal role playing and you shift to some sort of like kind of activity or other
Hmm.
game. And so when I looked over there at different times, I saw you playing pin the tail on the donkey,
Yes.
or something close to it, right?
Yep.
I saw players laughing very hard as they shambled their way towards trying to mark something on the wall. I forget, while
Hmm.
blindfolded or something.
Yeah.
I saw you playing crossbows and catapults,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Which is the 80s toy where it's like you build a fort, but it's designed and then you like shoot it apart with a toy
Hmm.
catapult, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah. Yep.
is this a new is this like a new Kickstarter version
Yeah,
of it or
so
something?
they did a Kickstarter remake of it, that, I think it shipped a couple months ago. So, like, that was sort of the impetus for basically the entire game that I ran. But
Okay.
yeah.
And yeah, when I looked over at the crossbows and catapult section, there were about half of the table appeared to just want to like launch the catapult and
Mhm.
watch it satisfactorily hit things. And the other half was, I saw people like measuring ranges
Yes.
and
Yes.
calculating arc trajectories of
Uh-huh.
the thing to
Yeah.
hit the castle. So
Yeah.
with that as a preamble, will you tell us how that game went, and will you talk a little bit about whether you feel like what you tried with it was a
Mhm.
success or a failure?
Yeah, so I will say that it was a resounding success. Like as far as like in terms of what I set out to do, I think it did it really well. I think the players had a lot of fun. I don't know if any of them like would ever want to play this again, or right, like, or it's not really designed to be played again by the same group. But the players were awesome. They bought into like the whole conceit of what we were trying to do. I think really well. Yeah. So the whole idea of it was sort of a heist, if you will. It was sort of like a rescue mission set in the Robin Hood universe. So Little John had been kidnapped by Prince John. So Robin Hood was putting together a group of an elite group of merry of merry people to go like rescue Little John. Yeah, so they all loved that and they bought into it. And their character sheets, they got to sort of like pick what they were good at and things like that. So we used Caltrop Core to do a lot of the dice rolling resolution. Yeah, and then like you mentioned, right? So then there was sort of these mini games that popped up throughout the game. So I had a third one planned that I had to cut just because of time. But the what you mentioned with Pin to the Tail and the Donkey, so like at the beginning of that, there was a joust sequence in that, so they were allowed to sort of like manipulate the joust, like kind of go and sabotage people's equipment or do stuff like that. And so every time they did that, I gave them a boon for the actual joust itself. So that included stuff like having me spin around 3 times before I tried to pin the tail on the donkey.
Oh, interesting.
Another one was they were allowed to move their tail up to 6 inches after placement, move my tail up to 6 inches after placement, and then the last one that I gave them, which was probably like too powerful for anyone to be able to do, was while I was walking, they were allowed to move the actual donkey on the wall wherever they wanted to. So
That's awesome. And
yeah.
we talked about this
Hmm.
about,
Yeah.
if I recall correctly, we talked about how if you were to do mini games like this, you would want to let people do things in the role playing side of the
Yeah.
experience to
Hmm.
give them benefits. And those sound like great benefits for Pin the
Yeah.
Tail and the Donkey.
Yeah, I think it worked really well. Like I intentionally set it up so that it was gonna be pretty easy for me to lose, right? Like, for, just to advance the plot. Advance the plot a little bit, right? So I think, like, again, great for a con game where it's like, hey, like, you're rewarded for sort of interacting with the plot in front of you by like making this like easy for you to win, right? And it's sort of fun for them too, because they were competing against like this Black Knight who, Black Knight Sir Guy, who, like, total like total dingus, like total jerk, right? Like, so that they wanted to utterly destroy this guy, right? So it's like, and then give them the opportunity to do so, they loved it, right? So that was super fun. Yeah, and like also just I think when we had talked on the podcast, we talked about actually like playing the Joust video game, like the video game Joust on the Atari.
Yes. Hmm.
Instead, ultimately, like that just felt like too complicated. So instead, I got like a $3 version of Pin the Tail on the Donkey. And again, that might have been someone else's recommendation, but like it just, yeah, I went and ran with it. So
Well,
yeah.
I mean, uh, all due respect, there's a reason these dopey physical party games are,
Mhm.
perennial favorites,
Yeah.
because there's just something that's fun about doing them. So I think that was
Oh
the
yeah.
right call.
Yeah, that's something super fun. I mean, like, so when I got it, when I was doing prep, I actually, like, put it up on the wall and tried to do it once myself, and it's like, oh, this is actually like there's some difficulty here, and this is kind of fun. It's like, oh, okay, right, like this is why kids still play Pin the Tail on the Donkey, like they still do pinatas, they still do all this sort of stuff because it is really fun. Yeah, yeah. So like that worked really well, and so I would highly recommend that as like, hey, do you need some sort of like weird resolution mechanic to like whatever game you're doing? Like, look outside to other game systems. Yeah, other game systems or just other games like childhood games stuff, right? It's sort of like a, I don't know, I kept on thinking about Squid Game, that show, when I was like
Hmm.
putting this together, right? Like Squid Game is a very violent show, but it's like based on the, hey, go play these games from your youth, and like, but there's like kind of bigger consequences to them. um yeah, so that, I think that part went really well, and then from there, so they got some information, and then they decided, then they were going to storm the castle, right? And so this is where the crossbows and catapults things that came in. It's interesting that you look over and saw sort of like the difference in the table approach to this, because I think this to me is like why con games are can be so fun, is because you just get a variety of players who are sort of interested in different stuff at your table, right? So like we very much had the
Yeah.
tactical, like, we got to get this exactly right. Like, we've only got one shot to do this. And other people were like, it doesn't really matter. Like, just shoot the thing. Like, right? Like, yeah, and I understand both sides like very well, because like at a certain point, it's like, please stop measuring stuff, just shoot.
Yeah.
But like, so they were able to like get some good shots off and like kind of crumble the castle too, right? And so this was like their approach to, hey, we're gonna go rescue this guy. How much damage can we do? How can we like make this easier on ourselves? Yeah, so like that part was really fun, and I think it also just like I took some video and stuff. Like, their last shot, they managed to just kind of explode the castle, and like that was just a great moment. It's like, hey, this plan worked, and now we get to kind of rush in and go rescue our friend. Yeah,
That's
so
great. And you didn't
yeah,
plan on that, right? I mean,
no,
you can't anticipate that they'll land that final shot and blow up the whole castle, right?
yeah, no. I mean, it was great. Like, thematically, it was perfect. I mean, but when I was putting together and kind of testing things out, I'm like, well, if they miss, am I going to just keep on giving them extra shots? And I just was like, no, like, we'll just have to sort of see see what happens. Yeah, so they did that, and then the final part of it was ended up just being sort of like a 3-room dungeon at that point, right? So like then we kind of cleared everything out and put a piece of paper down, and we just did like a 3-room dungeon with various guards and stuff they had to fight, and there was some good moments in there too, just story wise as well. And like, again, like all the players were super great. They like really leaned on their characters that they had created, yeah, to just like drive the narrative forward. So yeah, I had a ton of fun running it. Like, it is absolutely not designed to be a game that goes for a campaign, for instance, right? Like, this is very much a con game that I will probably keep in my back pocket and run run at some other point too, just because I think like the framework for it worked really well, and like everybody has a fond memory of Robin Hood, whether it's the Disney version, or Robin Hood Men in Tights, or like the Kevin Costner one, or I'm sure there's 10 others that people can point to that's like, oh, like this is my Robin Hood. I would love to go, like, yeah, be in that universe.
So the questions that sounds great, by the way.
Yeah.
Questions that come to my mind are: was this just a silly, goofy side thing that you don't feel the need to replicate, the next time you run a D&D for your
Hmm.
local group? Does this indict the way that your typical role-playing game determines success, like the success? Like, how did you feel? Did you think playing castles and crossbows and catapults was way more fun than rolling a skill check to breach the castle walls? Or did
Hmm.
you think, all right, that was fun, but like I see why D&D just does this as a skill check, not as a 30-minute side game? Like, how did you feel about that? Did it shake your confidence in what this whole role-playing
Mm.
rules endeavor we're embarked on is going after, or not?
It supplemented it. I think the distinction I would make is that if you were trying to go for, I don't know, go for like a campaign length interesting story, I don't know how well these sorts of things fit into it, because I think you need to have mechanics that you rely on for sort of like handling this sort of thing over and over, right? Like this worked because, like I'm partly sort of railroading the story. It's like I know they're going to have to go to the castle, and I know that if I set up a castle made out of, crossbows and catapults, like Lego style bricks, and give them a catapult, they're going to want to fire fire upon it, right? So it's like, in some way, I mean, they could have rejected it. I could have been like, no, that's, this is a stupid idea, Robin Hood. We need to just sneak in, and like in theory I should be okay with that, but in practice, right, like it's sort of like, well, oh come on, like we've got got everything set up, please, like let's just go do it. But I think if you're doing like a campaign, like there is something to the fact that, like, no, this is how we resolve like this sort of thing, so you can plan for it ahead of time, or, like you sort of know what's going on, or it's like, or you're coming to the second castle in the campaign, it's like, oh, like we're going to, we need to think this through with the tools that we have. Like we don't always get to set up a catapult, like, in a big field or whatever. That said, I mean, like, I don't know, like I think there are probably more ways to bring these sorts of things into your game than a lot of people might, I don't know, might, think at the like at first brush. So it's like, if there's anything that I take away from it, I think it's like be open to trying stuff like this. And like I know I'm not the first person to run a game that's like done something like this. Like then that's fine. But like it got back to, I think, how for me, like how like we used to play games when we were younger. Like so like I used to play crossbows and catapults when I was younger, and we would create these weird scenarios for ourselves. Like I don't think we ever played the game how you're supposed to. Like it was often like, oh, we're going to set up one of the castles on the kitchen table, another is going to be set up like, down the hall or something like that, right? Like there was, we would just immediately start kind of playing with like doing different stuff with it, and like that's engaging. Yeah. And so I mean, like, yeah, like one way to play this game would have just been draw a little, draw a castle on a, on a piece of paper, and it's like, well, okay, now we're going to storm the castle, like, roll your approach, like the Blaze in the Dark style. It's like, okay, you get 2d6, let's see if you, yeah, start with a controlled position or not. And like that could be fine too. But yeah, something about this I think was pretty fun, like, and it took effort to pull off, but like something about it was really fun, and like something that I think I want to do more of. But that's also just in my nature. I could see, I didn't grill the players on this afterwards. Some of them might have hated it. Like I know for a fact, at least the one of them loved it, but like I don't know if everybody did. Yeah, so it's like, I don't know. It's
Yeah.
sort of like what your players want and what you want out of the game too.
Was the person who loved it one of the people I saw like measuring
Yes.
the trajectory?
Yeah.
Like, okay,
Yeah. And he should be
that was
happy
very
because,
funny, by the
yeah,
way.
and he should be
I
happy
Yeah.
because like the result of it was the castle exploded
Yes,
in one
yes. Oh
shot.
yeah,
So yeah. Yeah.
you need that person in your game.
Yeah.
So, um, I'm just intrigued by this, although I don't know exactly why it's so intriguing. I when you when I saw this playing out at your table, the thing I thought of was like early, like mid 1990s video games
Mhm.
that had adventure games that often had these sorts of like mini games worked in. So I'm thinking like if you want to go really old, like Zork Zero,
Mhm.
or other, like you would be playing an adventure game, and then to unlock the door, you would be presented with a mini game that was like a classic tried and true game like Towers of Hanoi or
Yeah, yeah.
Tic Tac Toe or something like that. And you see this in modern games. Like if you try to pick a lock in any modern RPG like
Yes.
Skyrim or
Yeah.
Cyberpunk or Starfield, you have a lock picking mini game, right? In
Mhm.
Cyberpunk, it's like a logic like it's a logic like numbers puzzle.
Mhm.
In Skyrim and in Skyrim, it's like a and Fallout, it's this. Well, I don't know even know how to describe it. In Starfield, it's like this puzzle where you have to fit um, the the keys you have into the slots that are available to you.
Mhm.
And there's just something about the mini game, the like let's put the main game you're playing on pause and let's step off to the side for a minute, and you're going to do this thing that is like exists independently of all the mechanical systems we've built for this game.
Yes,
You know, it's
yes.
like I'm replaying Starfield right now, and it has the world's this very complex system of stats and skills and
Yeah.
attributes and equipment and stuff like that. But when you pick a lock, you're always playing the same fit the
Uh-huh.
slots into the right pegs game.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've picked maybe 500 locks in Starfield,
Yeah.
and I always get a little thrill out of it when I
Yeah.
complete one of the puzzles. Like so,
Yeah.
and it's I guess it's more interesting to me that RPGs don't do this by
Mhm.
default. I can't think of I mean, with the exception of maybe like Dread, which uses Jenga as its
Mhm.
resolution system, I can hardly think of any games that are like, okay, when your players try to talk their way past the trolls, break out a checkers board, and right?
Yes, yeah.
So why is that? That's intriguing to me, and I don't want to pull out a checkers board every time the players need to solve a puzzle in D
Mhm.
and D. But I don't know, and it makes my mind also goes to like early D&D AD&D modules D&D where the players were presented with like a riddle or a word puzzle to solve to like get through the
Mhm.
locked gate or something like that.
Yeah.
And something about that resonates, and I don't it a tiny part of me feels like this is an attempt to compensate for a weakness in the role-playing experience
Mhm.
that but I can't articulate really what that weakness is or why playing Towers of Hanoi to get through the gate resolves that, but it does.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, like in the Starfield example, like part of you wonders like why not just make a whole game of the lockpicking if it's so fun fun every time.
Yeah.
But I think like the lockpicking is only fun because it's like a special thing. A special thing too, right? Like if it was just like lockpicking puzzle after lockpicking puzzle after like you'd get sort of bored with the mechanics of it. Or you get really good at it and then it wouldn't be challenging or something. But like something about the like I don't know, you're playing this like role playing game, like you're doing all this talking, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I've got this like skill mechanics like thing that I have to do. You do. And I think that's what it taps into, at least for me, is like all of a sudden, you're playing this game where it's like you're rolling dice and you're thinking and you're like, you're role playing and stuff like that and kind of talking. And then you're asked to stand up and physically do something or to like aim and measure stuff. And like I think it taps into a different part of your brain and if you can find a way to make the connection between those two things strong, I think like that's where it really becomes like this really good experience. I almost said transformative, but that's ridiculous. Like that's too strong of a word. Like this really good experience when you can meld the mechanics with the narrative. I think like right, like so like the Towers of Hanoi example is good because it's like there's really nothing like narratively that's tying those two things together. But I mean, if it hints at like if you can tie those things narratively together, like just the strength of what they can do for the story that you're telling at the table. It's like, yeah, like the pin the tail on the donkey was silly, right? Like it's silly, but it also simulates like jousting, I think, in a way that very few other games might, right? Like how many other ones do you have where you're sort of like you're walking and placing something, right? Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
for sure.
like, and so again, like I could have done Towers of Hanoi, like, or I could have done whatever. Like I could have fired up Starfield and been like, okay, we're gonna do 10 of the lock picking, the lock picking
That
things or
that
something.
God, that would have been a disaster,
Yeah, that
but
would have been,
yes, go on.
yeah, an absolute
I
disaster.
I mean, I would have loved to see you do it, but it would have been a disaster.
Yeah, but it's I mean, yeah, there's something about that that I think can like it can give more weight to the narrative, right? So it's like at the end of, like after the joust, it's like, then I can like, so we've just played pin the tail on the donkey and we have a result, and like going straight from that to narrating like what they're seeing happening as they win this thing. It's like that was like a GM high moment for me, right? Of like, oh, like we sort of like took a swing at this thing, like this mechanic. It worked out really well. You won, and now I get to sort of narrate like the conclusion to that, and it felt like very much more physical than I think it would have if it was just like a straight die roll that it came down to.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know. It's like I think there's a lot of thoughts kind of swirling in there, but I mean, like I love 10 Candles, like Dread sounds awesome. Like I think there's something here to do more with.
Yeah, I wonder, like, thinking about Starfield, some of the thrill of it, or doing the number matching puzzle in Cyberpunk, like, these are complicated games that sometimes make me feel overwhelmed. Like, I
Yeah.
have to go on Reddit to like look for build guides,
Yeah.
in both of these games to figure out like where am I supposed to put all my skill points, and like,
Mhm.
but when that simple number matching puzzle comes up, that's something I can do. Like,
Yeah.
that's something that's just like it's like fun, untainted by the weight of the mechanics in a
Mhm.
sense, and I don't know. There's something about that. So, I mean, I'm not going to start handing my players a Sudoku puzzle every time they have to pick a lock
Yes.
in the next D&D game, but it does make me wonder, like there's obviously something there to this.
Mhm.
And you don't need to build a crossbows and catapults game in every D&D match, but at the same time, I don't know. Like, what was fun about that in crossbows and catapults, and is there a way to like pull that into the like skill check, roll a die against your skill value
Mhm.
kind of tedium that RPGs can fall into? I don't know.
Yeah.
That's food for thought.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think it's good. I mean, so my experience doing it is thumbs up. Please try it. let me know. Let me know about other ways you do that. Yeah, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention. So like Matt Wilson, my GM, he's done some really cool like in-game props that end up being sort of puzzles before for us as well. There's the one that really sticks out to me is he had this complicated cipher one time that we were supposed to solve, and like the table is full of a bunch of like ultra nerds, and like they one guy picked it and was like, oh, I know this cipher, and just sort of like did it did it without any
Of
yeah.
course,
So
yes.
like that one was like a little bit, yeah, but there was another one that was like a really cool, I think it was during the Trail of Narlathatep game that we are playing, like yeah, like we there was like I don't know, I think it was like a piece of cardboard, and he had like some pins, and we had like string that we were wrapping around and stuff. It was so cool, and it really engages like a different, I think a different like a different set of people, everybody's minds at the table. So like I don't know,
Yeah.
yeah, go forth and try it. So we're running a little long. I do want to talk about your Twilight 2000 game. Do you want to do that next time, or do you want to? Can we talk a little bit about it right now?
Let's talk about it now, but let's keep
Okay.
it really brief.
Okay.
And that's
Yeah.
okay because I don't have a ton to say about this.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so
This.
I ran
Okay.
Twilight 2000 and you were a player, so, you know, putting myself out there here and
Yeah.
lowering the shields over my game mastering heart. But tell me a little bit about what it was like to play in that game.
It was really. I've thought about that game a lot. Like it is. It's like a war game almost, right? It's like sort of like it's a hex crawl, if you will, but like with a lot more heart and like narrative and stuff. I really enjoyed it. Like, I don't think I'm gonna run out and like, play a Twilight 2000 campaign, but it was a fun group, and like it was a very tactically oriented group, I think as well, too, who like really got into sort of the numbers part of it. at the beginning of it, you were sort of handing out character sheets and kind of describing some of like the bookkeeping that we're going to have to do, and like my heart rate started to go up because I'm like, I don't want to have to do do any bookkeeping. Please don't make me. And like, but three of the other players were just like, yes, absolutely, please give me a sheet that I get to to get to write stuff down
Yes.
down on. Yeah, so it was really fun. And then my understanding of the game is like you really didn't have any kind of idea about where it was going to go, and so the story just
I
sort of
had zero
emerged.
idea. It was
Yeah.
100% determined by the deck of cards you guys I drew from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was like that was stunning. Like I like yeah. So you put a big map of Poland out in front of us and told us that it was World War III. We had lost like the war was going badly. Like you have lost contact with everybody else. Like figure out how to get out of Poland. Um, yeah, and so like we picked a point and we picked another point that we thought we were going to try to get to, and then just try to navigate our way through. Yeah, it was just like yeah. So I liked it a lot, and I think you did a really good job of sort of like fitting that into a con game too. Because like right towards the end, we had like this grand plan, but we also only had 5 minutes, 5 minutes to go or
Yes.
something. So
Yes.
you kind of like threw out all the rules and were like, let's just kind of Calvin ball this. I think which was the right move. But yeah, I enjoyed it quite a bit, and part of me wishes that we hadn't rolled as well as we did too, because like
I
it's
had the same thought
yeah.
actually. You guys rolled really well,
Hmm.
and I was thinking that not just in like the I'm the evil GM
Hmm.
mean sense of that, but like the this would be more interesting if you guys were flubbing these roles.
Yeah, yeah, because we sort of skated through a little bit on in certain circumstances where I don't think we should have should have like I mean we did do some good prep and strategizing and stuff and had some very good roles come up for us. Excuse me, probably like early on. So like we found a Jeep or not a Jeep. It was the Polish version of a Jeep, and then we found
Yeah.
like another one later on too, right? So there was like lots of stuff like that, but there was also some moments in there where I thought we were able to actually role play some interesting interactions as well. So again, like it's like a war game. Like we all have sort of like guns and ammo and things like that, but then at the same point we also have like a personality and a backstory and
Yeah.
stuff too. So like there were times where my character in particular, who's not militarily affiliated, did stuff that was suboptimal, right? Because
Yeah.
like he didn't didn't want to be part of the military, like didn't want the military complex. So
Well, I'm
yeah,
really happy to hear that. Like I didn't really know how it went.
okay,
And I mean, I expect you to be kind and polite here in the podcast, but it is gratifying if you really did have a good time. That's actually really gratifying to hear.
oh good, yeah,
And I want so this is a game that is incredibly structured,
mm-hmm,
almost to the level of a board game, right? Because
yes,
so
yeah,
every day is divided into four time slots,
mm,
and each of those time slots you assign yourself a task in that time slot, and it's you could almost have this be a board game where you're putting your piece you're putting your piece on the little game board on
yeah,
the task you're doing this turn,
yeah.
and I wanted like what was that experience like, because that was the defining rhythm of the game, was this relentless like you basically get to do one thing per time slot and then we move to the next time slot.
Mm-hmm,
And I as GM, I that started to feel a little overwhelming to me
mm-hmm.
as the game went on, like the demands of that pace. What did you feel about that?
Yeah, another one of the players made a comment sort of after we were done. It said like, "Oh, like I'd really love to play this over the course of a night where like we didn't have like a time constraint. Sort of
Hmm.
we're all sitting around like drinking whatever drink of our choice and sort of like not idly playing it, but also not like so intensely playing it. Yeah, so like I think like for a con game, right, we were all very focused, very much like a we got to go because we only got a certain amount of time on this. So I think like in some ways the bookkeeping allowed us to keep moving a bit because otherwise we would have been like gotten too distracted and then each segment of the day would have taken an hour to do.
Yeah.
But instead, we were able to do sort of multiple days. Like again, like I personally would not want to have to be the record keeper, like who's writing down like whatever it is doing each day, right? Because we had to like eat and sleep and rest, and like someone had to drive, and while you're driving you're not allowed to collect food, and like it's just like
Yes,
there's
it's
all these
quite
sort of
complicated.
yeah, it's quite complicated, right? Like, so every time we were trying to figure out what we had to do, it was like, "Hey, have you rested yet? Have you eaten yet?" Like, right? It's like we're making all these decisions tactically together. Yeah, and like I mean, like again, like I enjoyed it. Like I don't think I think mentally I'd get pretty exhausted if we had to go for like a fourth hour, a
For
fourth
sure.
hour on it. But yeah, but I think if the pace was slowed down a little bit too, I think like that would have been pretty fun.
Well,
Yeah.
for me,
Mm.
I wanted to make one comment is so I I prepared a lot for that game,
Mm.
but all of my prep went into something that did not come up even once in the game, and that
Yeah.
was combat. Like the
Yeah.
most involved part of that game is combat.
Yeah.
It's dense. It's war game level. Like what is the level of the cover that you're hiding behind? Like
Yeah.
sorts of stuff. And I put so many hours into mastering combat, and then we didn't have a fight. Like at the very end, even you and one or two other players were like, can we start a fight here even though we have a couple minutes left just so
Yeah.
we can see how like the fighting
Yeah.
goes?"
Yeah.
And it was like, well, we can, but we can't. There's not time to bring in this game's very comprehensive like battle rules
Yes.
in. And so that was one of those like just classic jamming moments. Like I might as well not have read the giant combat chapter that's like a third of
Yes.
the rule book, right? Like
Oh
let
my goodness.
alone I typed up cheat sheets, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
So that was just kind of funny for me. And the other thing was I played the last game at the con I played was a game run by Joel, and it was extremely fun. I had a blast. I
Hmm.
don't remember the name of the rule system he was using, but it was like 2400 or something. Does this
Okay.
ring a bell?
Yeah,
I
I don't know anything
I
about it.
had never heard of it, like, which is really funny because he's a little bit of a newbie GM, and
Yeah.
he brought, I think, the most niche, obscure like rule system you
That's
found
amazing.
deep
Yeah.
in the depths of like itch.io or something,
Yes.
so that was amazing. But that was a game almost entirely lacking in structure.
Hmm.
And so I felt like between the Twilight 2000 game, which is this the structure is everything, and
Mhm.
this other game, which was just like, hey, tell me what you're doing. You know, I
Yes.
felt like I felt like I experienced like the entire breadth of like this role playing hobby
Yeah, you did.
across two game sessions. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, that's so good. Yeah.
yeah. Okay,
Just real
well,
quick.
we're
It's
up at our time limit here.
yeah.
We could talk about this some more, but
Mhm.
I think we've hit on the basics. So,
Yeah.
do you have anything you want to wrap up with, like any kind of final observation? I guess here is my one question for you,
Mhm.
based on your experience running your game at the con. Is there something that you will bring into your next D&D game short of like, okay, let's break out crossbows and catapults? Is there
Mhm.
something you're going to bring into your next D&D game because of your experience running at the con? Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, I will be, I think, more open to like, yeah, just to trying stuff in general. But I think like another thing that worked well is like sort of fast forwarding narrative, like the narrative action too. Like I'm often a little bit hesitant in games to sort of like time skip a bit, but like I did that at least once in this game, and I think that worked really really effectively. Yeah, just sort of like jump to the action that you want to be doing rather than
Yes.
spending so much time doing like the in between stuff. If you don't have something strong planned for the in between stuff. Yeah.
That is a takeaway I had from playing games in the con too. Like
Mm.
it is really easy in a role playing game to spend time doing something that no one is enjoying, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And it takes like courage for you, the GM, to it takes courage and it takes you paying attention to be able to say, like, none of us are really having fun with this. We don't have to go through this even if their rules have a
Hmm.
process for it. Like
Yeah.
let's just move on. And so
Yeah.
that's neat to hear you say, for
Yeah.
sure. And
Yeah.
like in your D&D game, if like the fight against the kobolds is like entering round 14 and it's just a
Yeah.
Vietnam like slog that no one
Yeah.
is enjoying, like, just fast forward to the end. No one cares, right?
Yeah,
So,
you do not need to break out Twilight 2000 to resolve your Kobold
right.
interaction.
But
Yeah,
if you do, write in and tell us how it
yeah,
what happened. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, Chris,
Okay,
let's
cool.
go ahead and wrap up.
Yeah, that
Will you
sounds
sign
good.
us out here?
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all so much for listening. This has been Roll for Topic. We are part of the Roll for It media podcasting network. Our sister show, The Splat Book with John Corey, is awesome. I just listened to the recent one. They had Haley on, who Haley designed the new Splat Book logo, which you should all go check out at thesplatbook.com. It is really wonderful. Haley, I think this is fair to say, loves drawing sort of worms and dragons and stuff like that. So they did a really good treatment on the Splat Book logo. And then the conversation they had, Jess and Ben were on there as well. And they sort of just talked with Haley about like, what is it like being an artist, right? Like these days. And I think it was really good. There's a great discussion sort of in the last half about like AI and like what's going to be a threat and what isn't a threat. But yeah, I found it a really like motivating thing to listen to. So yeah, go check it out at thesplatbook.com. Yeah, so that does it for us. Please, yeah, let us know if you enjoyed this episode. Let us know if you want us to never talk about Roll for Topicon ever again. It's fine. But yeah, I think that'll do it for us. So I've been Chris Salzman.
I've been Andy Rao.
And remember, if your players are having fun, you're a great GM.